5 signs of a lack of empathy. Lack of empathy can have a huge impact on a person's life and relationships. It is a huge challenge for many and is often characterized as selfishness, prejudice and stereotypes. Lack of empathy can be a huge challenge when it comes to maintaining healthy relationships with others. Concepts of self and the other are realities that have a huge mutual influence, as they complement and define each other. Therefore, an inability to understand others is often an indication that one does not fully understand oneself. Self-interest and failure to accommodate different viewpoints are traits that often lead to negative and unhelpful behaviors. One of the qualities that has allowed humans to differentiate themselves from other species and create vast and complex civilizations is cooperation. When we fail to empathize with those around us, however, it becomes much more difficult for us to work together effectively. Many of us have very little understanding of what empathy actually is. Often we confuse it with traits such as generosity. Therefore, it is important to talk about some of the signs that indicate a lack of empathy. Read on to find out more. Empathy lies in our ability to be present without meaning. Marshall Rosenberg. 1. Use yourself as an example. Lack of empathy often goes unnoticed. It typically manifests itself in the form of a counseling session. This could be, for example, if someone tells you about a problem they have and you respond by talking about how you solved a similar problem in your own life. Likewise, if a person finds it difficult to do something, you respond by talking about the virtues you have used when you have been in a similar situation. All of this is a clear sign of a lack of empathy. True empathy means seeing situations from another person's perspective instead of your own. 2. Lack of tact. Nowadays it is not uncommon to come across a so-called person of sincerity. Some people pride themselves on being blunt and express their ideas recklessly without thinking. In practice, they can be harmful, rude, or simply inconsiderate of others. In human communication, it matters a lot who we talk to and the relationship we have with this person. The language should not be used bluntly unless absolutely necessary. Otherwise, it becomes a means of imposing one's discomfort on others. 3. Stereotypes and prejudices, signs of a lack of empathy. Stereotypes are about as far from empathy as you can get. The tendency to generalize and oversimplify the traits and qualities of others is a sign of a great inability to see people for what they are. Although objects can have identical properties, this is not the case with people. Prejudice has a similar mechanism as it is based on generalizations that lack a real basis. They are only sustained by a lack of knowledge and independent thinking. In order to show empathy, you have to be open to seeing another person's reality instead of sticking to superficial labels. 4. Lack of empathy and spreading gossip. Gossip is an act that shows complete disregard for others. By prying into other people's personal lives, we demonstrate a lack of respect for their privacy. Spreading information about another person, whether out of curiosity, envy or boredom, is the same as exposing them. Rumors are like playing with mirrors. Each of us sees ourselves reflected in the person responsible for spreading the rumor. We use what we see in them to examine what others may think us, whether they have picked up on our weaknesses and faults. The reality is that gossip only serves the purpose of satisfying a form of childish selfishness that destroys the reputation of others, to promote one's own self-esteem. 5. Utility ethics. Utilitarianism is sometimes expressed through forms of behavior that seek to transform others into instruments that enable us to achieve our goals or satisfy our needs. In other cases, It manifests as a distorted assessment based on how useful they are in completing a group or social purpose. In both cases, this utilitarian ethic is a sign of a lack of empathy. Every human being has values and dignity simply because they exist. We are all part of the same species and we all deserve the same level of respect and consideration from others. It doesn't matter if you are in prison, in a hospital, or living in poverty. Signs of a lack of empathy are just signs. Everyone is to some extent able to see, understand, and accept the views of others. By constantly trying to understand and show compassion to others, we can all learn to show more empathy. It will benefit you as much as those around you, and it will open the door to previously unknown worlds. Development of empathy in childhood. Hoffman's model explains how empathy begins and how it develops in children. Before we explain the development of empathy in childhood, let's talk about the term itself. The origin of the term empathy comes from what the Scottish Enlightenment called sympathy. Adam Smith and David Hume, in his treatise on human nature, described it as a natural means of communication. This definition is the foundation of neuroscience, developmental psychology, and social psychology. The development of empathy in childhood reveals very interesting facts about some evolutionary aspects of our species. There is one idea that stands out: our socialization is not a result of empathy, at least not initially. In fact, evolutionary biology tells us that altruistic behavior arose before we acquired this potential. Some species that lack empathy exhibit such behavior. This is the case with social insects like bees. They die shortly after stabbing a target because they sacrifice themselves to protect their community. Thus, the connection between empathy and altruism is not simple. The developmental psychology approach. Lipp's work, 1903, focused on the difference between the terms sympathy and empathy. Researchers in developmental psychology defined empathy as a multidimensional concept that takes into account the cognitive component. Thus, it involves the recognition and understanding of other people's feelings and the emotional component related to sharing love or an indirect response. If you meet someone without a smile, give them one of yours. Dolly Partain. Cognitive models of empathy development. Since the 1990s, people have studied empathy from the perspective of emotional intelligence. This is Wimmer and Solovey's 1997 model stands out. Empathy is considered to include the perception and understanding of other people's feelings. Another relevant model is the Barron model of emotional social intelligence, 1997, 2000. This model posits that empathy is a component of a factor that we refer to as interpersonal skills. This means developing the emotional intelligence ability to be aware of and understand other people's feelings and ideas. These two models are not as integrative as those proposed by developmental psychology. In fact, they focus more on the cognitive component. Recently, Butson and collaborators proposed a distinction between perspective taking and empathy. Gaining perspective appears to be the precursor to specifically empathic responses. Butson et al. 1992. Hoffman's model of the development of empathy in childhood. Hoffman, a leading theorist on the development of empathy in childhood, recognizes two dimensions in the study of empathy: the recognition of other people's internal states, the indirect loving response. Hoffman's model explains how empathy begins and how it develops in children. In fact, he says the central idea is the integration of love and cognition that goes beyond an information processing approach. He argues that empathy develops in a similar way to the stages of social cognitive development. This process begins with an empathic global feeling where a child does not have a clear distinction between self and others. Thus, they are confused about the source of emotions. From here it proceeds through several phases to the most advanced step, which combines what was achieved in previous phases. In the more advanced stages, a person can be empathic with others, mainly by knowing that there are physical entities other than themselves, and that others have internal states independent of them. A mature level of empathy allows a person to be more affected by the vital conditions of others, rather than by an immediate situation. According to Hoffman, there must be parallelism between feelings and affections and thoughts, moral principles and behavioral tendencies. Stages in the development of empathy in childhood. According to Hoffman, the development of empathy in childhood consists of 4 stages. The first phase, global. This happens during the first year of a person's life. Here, a child still does not perceive others as different from himself. Thus, they mistake the pain they perceive in others as their own, as if it is happening to them. For example, a baby who sees their mother crying may wipe their own eyes. Another example: an 11-month-old girl saw another girl fall and started crying. She stared at the victim for a moment, then put her thumb in her mouth and hid her face in her mother's lap. She acts this way as it would have been the most common reaction if she herself had fallen. The second stage, egocentrism. This phase corresponds to the second year of a person's life. Here, the child is aware that others can also experience unpleasant situations. However, they assume that the internal states of others are the same as those they experience themselves. For example, a 13-month-old boy who sees a sad adult may offer them his favorite teddy bear. Another example is when a child of the same age runs to find their mother to comfort another child who is crying. The third stage, other people's feelings. This phase lasts from the second to the third year of life. Here, a child is aware that the emotions they experience are different from other people's, yet they may respond to them in a selfless way. During this period, a child is already able to understand that another person's intentions and needs differ from their own. Therefore, a person's feelings may also differ from their own. They can thus offer comfort to others. Fourth stage, other living conditions. This last stage is the last childhood period. In it, other people's feelings are perceived not just as reactions to a mere moment, but also as an expression of their general life experience. That is, they respond differently to transient and chronic pain conditions because they take into account the general condition of others. 7 signs that you learned to suppress your emotions as a child. You may have learned to suppress your emotions as a child if you had a dysfunctional upbringing where not much empathy was shown. Growing up, maturing and becoming an adult. Is there a more complicated and challenging process? The answer is no. In fact, one of our greatest challenges as humans is reaching maturity with sufficient self-confidence and emotional intelligence. This is how you develop your potential and are able to establish satisfying relationships. But it is difficult if you learn to suppress your emotions as a child. It is a sad and frequent reality that many adults are emotionally numb. This term refers to the scars, injuries, and psycho-emotional changes caused during their upbringing. This is often due to unqualified carers who change many areas of the child's development. When caregivers attack or underestimate the child's needs, it actually affects the child's recognition of his own feelings. So much so that it is common to see men and women unconsciously inhibiting what they feel on a daily basis. They process any inner feeling or sensation with discomfort or even shame. Therefore, it is crucial to find out if you are experiencing this type of emotional numbness. Emotional neglect is invisible to a society, but it is the kind that has the greatest consequences. You usually integrate the emotional inhibition schema in your childhood. It must be disabled. Signs that you learn to inhibit emotions as a child. A child can be well fed, go to school well dressed and even be diligent in his studies. But there is a kind of invisible abuse that tends to go completely unnoticed in society. It is invisible neglect. In this type of interaction, parents neglect or even violate their children's emotional needs. Research conducted by the Massachusetts General Hospital Neurodevelopmental and Psychiatric Genetics Unit, USA, claims that emotional neglect in childhood increases the risk of depression in adolescence. However, it seems that children are not aware of this problem. If you were born into an environment where your emotional needs were neglected or criticized, you likely normalized this dynamic. After all, you had nothing to compare it to. Consequently, you integrated a schema in which you considered what you felt to be unimportant. Also, you won't have realized anything was wrong until you were an adult. It is only then that you realize that your parents have taught you to suppress your emotions. Here are the signs. One area where you experience difficulty due to your pattern of emotional inhibition is in relationships. 1. The feeling of emptiness is a constant in your life if you learn to inhibit the emotions as a child. If you had to express how you feel right now, you wouldn't be able to find the right words. Having said that, the only image that pops into your mind is one of emptiness. You experience it on a somatic level in your stomach, your throat, your hands, etc. It is an overwhelming feeling that fills you with discomfort and frustrates you as you are unable or do not know the method to get in touch with your emotions to understand what you're feeling. 2. You feel inadequate. When you reached adulthood, you realized that something was wrong with you. There was something preventing you from being happy and feeling good about yourself. Therefore, today you do not like your character, your way of being. In addition, you compare yourself to others, and believe that you lack spontaneity, self-confidence and feeling security. 3. You feel uncomfortable in many social situations. Naturally, you like to have friends, go out, socialize occasionally and enjoy connecting with others. But these associations with relaxation, expression of joy and radiance do not fit with you. This means that your surroundings describe you as cloud. But in reality, you are more uncomfortable than shy. You feel like a fish out of water. 4. Your partner tells you that you are cold or too complex. Often your partner gets frustrated with you because he/she says he/she needs more from you. He/she asks for closeness and emotional intimacy, and for you to express your feelings and create more contact with him/her. But you don't know how to do it. It's a language you don't understand, and you feel lost and even angry. This means that you are always waiting for your partner to do it for you. In fact, he/she should show you affection to guess what you need. There is no point in him/her demanding excessive emotional validation since you don't know how to offer it. 5. You choose silence instead of expressing what you feel or need. If you learn to suppress your emotions as a child, you will have a really hard time expressing your anger, disappointment. Everything that hurts you or makes you sad or tormented, you hide in the depths of your being. It is as if you have thrown these things into a well and never want to see them again. You suppress what you need because you assume that what you feel is not important. You do it because that's what you learned as a child. If you have suffered this way, You have learned to suppress your emotions and developed a really high self-criticism towards yourself. You feel inadequate. 6. You don't value yourself or put others first. If you think your feelings are irrelevant, you don't respect yourself as a person either. This is the universal principle of suffering that you must keep in mind when raising your own children. By validating, providing presence and relevance to your children's needs, you will make them understand that their experiences are important and that they deserve others to take them into account. If you are raised with indifference, you live with the emptiness of low self-esteem. It often makes you anticipate what others want more than what you yourself need. 7. Poor emotional communication as a result of learning to suppress emotions as a child. When you are used to inhibiting your emotions, your communication becomes immature. You are, e.g., unable to have discussions or make agreements. You usually get angry immediately and cut off any dialogue because you don't know how to make yourself understood. You juggle words to try to be confident in front of others, but it never works. Also, the most intimate conversations make you uncomfortable because you don't know what to say or how to express yourself. You would like to master the language of emotions more, but you are aware that you have serious limitations in this regard. When you have learned to suppress your emotions as a child, it is extremely difficult for you to communicate and achieve intimacy with others. How to overcome your emotional inhibition. The emotional inhibition schema is a distortion from childhood that you can reframe, heal and correct. Indeed, it is never too late to empower yourself in the proper exercise of emotional intelligence. Getting in touch with what you feel, identifying it and naming it is a big step forward. Next comes the most crucial exercise, knowing what to do with your feelings. It is important to learn some techniques regarding emotional communication and boosting self-esteem. As mentioned, growing up in an environment where your feelings were ignored or punished causes you to invalidate yourself. Repairing your view of yourself is of the utmost importance in order to build healthier relationships and feel worthy of working towards your dreams. Compassionate empathy, from emotion to action. Can you say you feel true empathy? It is wonderful when someone else understands the reality of your feelings. But it's even better when they go beyond feeling and having intentions and arrive at compassionate empathy. This includes doing something, providing active support and generally helping with what they can now. If there is one thing the world needs right now, it's compassionate empathy. This means not settling for understanding, connection, the heart that empathizes with other people. This is about taking action. It is about providing support for one, love and true well-being. Lewis Carroll once said that one of the secrets of life is that we are not just here to be. We are also here to help and ensure that everyone can experience the world in a dignified and beautiful way. But let's be honest, it can be really hard for people to do this sometimes. It's hard because so many of us let the intentions and feelings be, but we never act on them. For example, we can support countless things on social media with a like, a share or by signing a petition. We have an eye for endless problems in our society. But we don't always see the problems that are much closer to us. Compassionate empathy is more than just feeling. Compassionate empathy means being able to provide support to people in your life. The problem is that you may not be fully aware that this friend or colleague needs your active support at any given time. In some cases, you may be well aware of it, but you don't know what to do about it. What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others will remain in the world and be immortal. Albert Pike. The third kind of empathy. Compassionate empathy was defined by psychologist and emotion expert Paul Ekman. The idea was also useful to Daniel Goleman when he developed his concept of emotional quotient, which is part of the theory of emotional intelligence. It is also important to understand that sympathy is not a narrow, flat concept. It can be about much more than just understanding someone else's emotional reality. The concept of empathy is actually something that needs to be understood much broader and more complex than that. And the truth is that not many people would score very high if they were to take a test of their emotional competence. Let's dwell a little deeper on what empathy is. Types of empathy. First, there is emotional empathy. In Daniel Goleman's own words, it can be contagious, even dangerous, if you don't know how to put limits on it and sacrifice yourself for other people's suffering. This type basically means that one is able to relate to another's emotional reality. This means that you can empathize with them and put yourself in their place. It's a process that involves you mirroring neurons, your emotions, and even physical responses. Second, there is cognitive empathy. This type involves you using your intellect and the cognitive processes such as attention, reflection, communication and intervention. Basically, it involves knowing how a person feels, why they feel that way, and in some cases being able to guess what they are thinking. Finally, there is the great unknown that so many of us neglect: compassionate empathy. In the words of Daniel Goleman, true compassion means not only feeling someone else's pain, but also doing something to ease it. This type of empathy means that you can feel and understand why they feel that way and that you then try to help them. What are people like with compassionate empathy? These people have taken another step in their personal growth. They are basically experts in managing relationships with other people. They are balanced and know how to react in different situations. Exercising and honing your empathy will help you always act somewhere between logic and emotion. It can help you evaluate situations from a very balanced perspective. This means that you don't get carried away by people's emotions, but also go behind the cold logic that just sees things, but doesn't do anything about them. A person with compassionate empathy knows how to act in almost any situation. They always find a way to give the right support to that person. People with compassionate empathy are good at reciprocity. Successful relationships and meaningful bonds are always built on an understanding of reciprocity. It's a constant: you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This means knowing when to listen and respond, and also having the feeling that you deserve the same. This is what makes compassionate empathy part of our personal well-being. It's not just about helping other people. It is also about you receiving support yourself when you need it. They know the key to connecting with others. Connecting with others is one of the important things about compassionate empathy. It means that one can meet another with sincerity. You will understand their personal reality and accept it, without being judgmental, preconceived, or having hidden intentions. This contact, based on respect and goodwill, will also help you to see their needs and what you can do to help them. But just as importantly, good compassionate empathy doesn't mean you have to act like a savior every time you help. You need to know what to offer and how, because people don't always ask for what they need. You should always keep that in the back of your mind. We would like to end with a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. The greatest gift we can offer others is our attention. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will blossom like flowers. That's true. But sometimes, you have to go the extra mile. You have to take action. You have to know what is the right thing to do. 6 supportive and considerate responses to children. No matter how children behave, it is incredibly important to give them emotionally considerate feedback on the negative remarks they give themselves. Our response to children is very important. Above all, we get a glimpse of their confidence in their own abilities when they talk about themselves in the first person. In other words, we cannot ignore their daily remarks such as, "I can't, I'm just doing it wrong, I'm embarrassed, or there is nothing interesting to do." Because these remarks have an important undertone which could be a sign of low self-esteem. If we know how to solve these situations, and can find the right answers for children, it can help us build a beneficial, caring and thoughtful nature from a very young age. By being aware of the importance of never ignoring a feeling, we can provide a range of feedback that can help them rethink their destructive claims. Let's look at some examples. 1. The golden grain. I can't is the golden nugget. Too many of us have included it in our inner dialogue, sometimes even outed to, since we were very young. This is a normal expression that is indicative of fatigue, lack of energy, indifference and lack of self-confidence. We usually respond by saying, "Yes, you can." Sometimes it is followed by these horrible expressions, "What nonsense," or "Don't be lazy." How can we help them question these thoughts or this way of being? Keep in mind that many times, it's best to first answer back with questions, such as these. What do you mean by you can't? What proof do you have that you can't? How do you know if you don't try? Do you think it helps you to say, "I can't"? Don't say, "I can't," but say, "It's going to cost me, but I can do it." 2. The best response to children when they say, "I don't feel like it. I will not do it." Reluctance and lack of interest when it comes to certain tasks is mostly normal. It may seem hopeless, but they must understand that there are certain tasks that must be solved for their own good. The best response to children and the best way to support them when you ask them the following questions is to send them this message. Don't say, "I don't feel like it, so I don't." Say instead of, "I'll do it even if I don't feel like it right now." After all this, it's all about asking questions like, what would happen if we all did exactly what we wanted right now? Should we never do anything we don't want to do? Can you imagine a world where no one got their act together? What if a driver got tired of respecting the traffic rules? Or if the doctor got tired of healing others? This type of question is going to help them reflect on their reluctance and change their attitude. 3. I don't feel like doing it because I'm shy. When you think about it, laughing at someone's embarrassment is a terrible thing. If we laugh at an emotion that could contribute to suffering, then we make fun of their emotional vulnerability. We must create a sense of security around it, which shows them that while we must not completely pretend that nothing happened, we must have understanding and show that we can help and sympathize. 4. I'm tired, sad or angry. It is a big mistake we make when we deny their emotional responses. Maybe it's because it seems so normal to us. This is not so strange, because ever since we were children, we have heard people respond to someone's crying by saying, "Don't cry, there is nothing wrong." There are emotional expressions that embarrass most people in our society. But by denying them, we shut down something very important in both children and adults. 5. Don't pigeonhole them as being clumsy, naughty, or stupid. This does not help in providing a healthy self-esteem. When a child does something wrong, there are many ways to tell him. It is not right to hit your brother. You don't have to destroy your toys, or you'll have to work a little harder to read up on maths. 6. But don't use words like clever, capable, or intelligent, either. A child isn't going to understand what it's all about when you talk to them like that. Instead, you can say, "You did really well with your homework, you cleaned very nicely," or "I love watching you paint." That is, we can assess their behavior, but we must not assess the child. Remember that if we want to reach them, we must use an appropriate pitch and never attack them. How talking to them in a caring and sympathetic tone is fundamental for a good upbringing and new learning discoveries. Remember that it is from us that they get the psychological model, so we should take the management of their upbringing seriously. Therefore, we should think about our response to children. Emotional characteristics of gifted children. Gifted children tend to experience really deep and intense emotions. They make them experience the world in a different way. Gifted children tend to learn incredibly quickly. However, not everything is simple for them. Although they may make faster progress than their peers, they often need support to manage their emotions and deal with certain social situations. Moreover, the complexity of their development is seen not only in their intellect, but also in their emotional world. E.g., they often have to face situations in the social sphere which are in line with their academic level, but which they are not emotionally prepared to handle. Their vital intensity is thus not characterized by the fact that they feel more than others, but by the special way in which they experience the world, as more alive, penetrating, intense and complex. Gifted children. These children are not all the same. Each one of them has their own qualities that make them a special individual. That said, there are several traits that they have in common, even if they don't all show them in the same area. Here are some of them according to Clark, 2008. Cognitive traits. Great abstraction ability. Interest in problem solving. Avid reading habits. Large vocabulary. Intellectual curiosity. Critical thinking, skepticism and self-criticism. Goal-directed behavior. Ability to study independently. Many interests and abilities. Creative features. Creativity and ingenuity. Good sense of humor. Good imagination. Open to stimuli. Intuition. Flexibility. Self-acceptance and disregard of social norms. Commitment to self-selected work. Emotional traits. Unusual emotional depth and intensity. Sensitivity or empathy for the feelings of others. High expectations for oneself and others. Greater self-awareness. Need for emotional support. Need for coherence between abstract values and personal actions. Advanced level of moral judgment. Idealism and sense of justice. Behavioral traits and gifted children. Spontaneity. Enthusiasm. Focused on their passions. Resistance to changing activities when they are preoccupied with their own interests. Extremely energetic. Only needs a little sleep or time to relax. Constantly asking questions. Insatiable curiosity. Impulsive, anxious and energetic. Determination in important areas. High level of frustration. Unstable temperament, especially regarding perception of failure. Now that you have a general idea of the characteristic features that can identify a gifted child, we will now focus in depth on their emotional dimensions. The emotional dimension of gifted children. Many people tend to think that gifted children are little introverts with a tendency to isolate themselves. They may also see them as quite neurotic and unfriendly, etc. However, this is nothing more than stereotypes. Furthermore, some studies claim that there are a number of prejudices about giftedness that are socially widespread and lead people to believe that this type of child has difficulties socially and emotionally. Gifted children are not necessarily withdrawn as people often tend to believe. They also do not have pronounced problems relating to others or are particularly anxious, depressed or suicidal. In fact, gifted individuals may be less likely to experience depression, anxiety or suicide. Rios Ampers and Reens I. 2004. Martin et al. 2010. Eklund et al. 2015. Furthermore, they can exhibit the same level of well-being and stress as average people. Likewise, they can be as agreeable and conscientious and possess social skills as good as anyone of average intellectual ability. Boardston, 2016. However, not all gifted children function well in the emotional and social dimensions, just as not all average people know intellectually how to handle their emotions. What we want to emphasize is that not all gifted children experience emotional and social problems, as people often tend to believe. When we researched the emotional problems that gifted children can have, we found a number of studies that shed light on the subject. However, these results cannot be generalized. This is because, as mentioned, not all gifted children are the same. What does the research suggest? The research on gifted children produced the following results. Gifted children are more emotionally and physiologically sensitive to their environment. Gifted children, ages 9 to 15, with low self-esteem are vulnerable to emotional imbalance. Boys experience more behavioral and emotional problems than girls. Gifted children have a lower level of self-disclosure/openness and self-concept. Furthermore, their level of empathy and social skills decrease as they age. Gifted students have higher negative moods. They are reflected in lower levels of subjective well-being and emotional intelligence than in non-gifted students. Gifted children tend to score high on worry, hypersensitivity, social concerns, and perfectionism. Gifted children scored higher in depression to describe themselves as more inattentive and with low social functionality. Furthermore, they had a worse perception of their physical health. As you can see, there are no fixed rules that can be applied to gifted children. Some studies provide results compatible with the hypothesis of a greater vulnerability to anxiety and mood disorders. On the other hand, others offer data that reject this hypothesis. Furthermore, some claim that gifted children may experience relationship problems, while others claim the opposite. Therefore, these studies allow us to confirm that gifted children may or may not experience emotional problems just like non-gifted children. You must always remember that everyone is not the same. Some of us are e.g. stronger in certain emotional traits than others. After all, we are all different. How to turn a child into an emotional expert? It is essential that children are able to identify the emotions they feel by name. An emotional expert can regulate their emotions better and use empathy to connect with others. Learn how to teach children about emotional intelligence here. You make countless decisions every day. You take many of them automatically, but you get a chance to reason about some of them. Emotions affect any of these situations. Unfortunately, strong emotions can sometimes lead you to do things that go against your values or interests. To avoid such mistakes, you need to become an emotional expert. You can also give children a gift in life if you start educating them about emotions while they are young. Emotions motivate you to react. We begin to notice their effect in childhood. This is true despite the fact that few children, adults stop and think about this. This is why childhood is the best time to lay the foundations and build emotional regulation tools. If you can encourage this in children, they will never be overwhelmed by their emotions. Instead, they will use the energy their emotions produce wisely. They will be able to use this energy to motivate behavior according to their emerging value system. The first step to becoming an emotional expert. The first step is to know the basic emotions. In addition to knowing what emotions are, it also involves knowing what they are useful for. The basic emotions that children need to become emotional experts at are fear, anger, sadness, joy, curiosity, disgust, and love. Children who are a little older will also benefit from learning about shame. Some of these emotions, such as anger, motivate people to hit, insult, or attack. On the other hand, other emotions, such as joy, increase the likelihood that a person will appear open, energetic, and generous. Second step. The second step on the road to becoming an emotional expert is recognizing emotions. You will need to be able to recognize the basic emotions in yourself as well as in others. Without having mastered the previous step, this is an impossible task. You can't recognize something if you don't know what it is. If you know the gestures, looks, and behaviors that the basic emotions generate, you'll be able to recognize them quickly when you see them. This is why it is essential that children are able to identify the emotions they feel by name. For example, you can help them become familiar with them by saying things like "you feel happy, so it's hard for you to sit still." Another example is, "you want to hit your brother because you are angry." Third step to becoming an emotional expert. The next step consists of legitimizing the emotions that the child feels. In other words, you must allow the child to feel his feelings. Some phrases you can use for this purpose are, "it's normal for you to feel that way," or "I understand why it hurts." Another example is, "we all feel frustrated when we don't get what we want." These phrases are much more helpful than saying things like, "don't cry, it's not that bad," or "I don't understand why you are afraid of this." To educate children about emotions, you have to put yourself in their place, in their circumstances. Being empathetic means accepting their feelings. At the same time, you need to teach them some alternatives to channeling the emotions into desirable forms of behavior. You should teach them this so they don't engage in the immediate impulsive actions their emotions drive them to take. Fourth step. At this point we are ready to learn how to regulate emotions. You can't stop emotions, but you can manage the behavior that the internal dialogue they create produces. To manage your behavior, you need to know how to distinguish between behavior and feelings. Emotions are what you feel and behavior is what you do. Feeling angry does not justify hurting someone. You have to teach children that there is a margin between emotion and action where one's conscience can make a decision. They will have to work on strengthening this margin. Continuing to use anger as an example, you can teach children relaxation techniques. Alternatively, teach them polite ways to correct someone's behavior so they don't hurt them again. Fifth step. Reflecting on things is a mental act that makes you as human. To become an emotional expert, you need to learn how to do this. Reflect on the emotions you feel, as well as the sensations, thoughts, and behaviors they produce. This is the fifth step. Help children take a step back and think about what is going on. It will help them know their feelings better. It will also enable them to regulate their emotions more easily. Sixth step to becoming an emotional expert. As we continue down the path to becoming an emotional expert, we need to understand that some emotions are not appropriate in certain situations. For example, if you get a scholarship but your friend does not, then it is not appropriate to express your joy when he or she tells you that he or she did not get it. You need to use empathy to detect feelings in others. If your feelings are different from theirs, you should adapt your behavior to the situation. This is why you need to teach children some effective ways to deal with their emotions. This applies most of all to negative emotions. 7th step. The final step consists of establishing a story around what has happened. This step involves making sense of feelings or explaining what just happened. If a little girl has nightmares and wakes up screaming and crying, you have to tell her that she just had a bad nightmare. You also need to tell her that she cried because she felt scared. It is essential for the little girl to understand that her nightmares do not have to affect her current reality. It is not easy to turn a child into an emotional expert. You have to dedicate time to the task. You also need to maintain a high level of empathy and patience. Nevertheless, you have to keep in mind that when you teach children how to deal with their emotions, you are contributing to a better future for them. You give them resources so that they can later avoid confrontations and establish better relationships with others. Good advice for teaching children about joy. Teaching children about joy is the most important task that you must undertake as a parent. You want to give your child a good education and values, but the most basic thing is to put a smile on his or her face every day. Because if you don't think about a child's happiness when you raise them, nothing else will be worth anything. The best way for a child to want to learn and internalize values is through relationships where they feel protected and by enjoying joy every day. Below I would like to give you a number of tips for teaching children about joy. It is a complex but truly inspiring task that will fill your heart and soul with satisfaction, pride. Never take your frustrations out on them. If you want to teach your children about joy, make sure that you never, under any circumstances, turn your frustrations against them. Their hearts will not be able to understand why so much is required of them. Maybe your childhood dream was to be the best soccer player or the best in your class. But have you ever asked your children if this is what they really want? They really do resemble you. We must not forget that they carry your genes, but they are other people with their own needs and desires. One of the luckiest things that can happen to you in life is to have a good childhood. Agatha Christie. Achieve good communication to teach children about joy. When it comes to raising children, it is absolutely necessary for you to create good communication with them. For example, it is logical for frustration to arise at times, both in children and parents, since the children have not fully developed their communication skills. But you must not despair. When you are trying to communicate with your children or you observe strange or conspicuous behavior, think about yourself. But think about yourself when you were a child. Make the effort and do some introspection. Go back in time. What did you feel? What motivated you? What made you happy? You will probably find a lot of yourself in them. It will help you understand them better. The use empathy. Regarding the last point, when it comes time to teach your children about happiness, empathy is an extremely valuable tool because it will allow you to understand the little ones much better. Understanding your own childhood needs and wants is very helpful for understanding and empathizing with your children. What games did you like? What foods were your favorites? How did you like your parents to treat you? How did you react to new things? Responding to all these questions and many others will help you enter the children's world and be able to establish a good relationship with them. It's never too late to have a good childhood. Tom Robbins. Give them all your love. When it comes to teaching children about joy, it is important for you to give them all your love. In this regard, you must not leave any water in a well. Give them everything. But we must never confuse giving love with giving children everything they want. Our young people need routines and boundaries. They need to know what is right and wrong so that they can internalize values and feel safe and thereby form their personality. That said, children who get everything they want, be it materially or emotionally, run the very real risk of becoming future tyrants who are unable to understand themselves, frustrated and facing serious problems with autonomy and build relationships with the people around them. Dedicate time to them. Teaching children about joy takes a lot of time and patience. In the beginning, their immediate family members are their whole world. They are the place where they feel safe, therefore you must always be there for them. As your children move forward, play with them, enjoy their learning, give them love and protection, and give yourself completely to them. Your time and patience are of great value to them, because you are the mirror in which they see themselves and what they really want to be. However, this point must not be seen as an obligation. Teaching children about joy will also be fulfilling for you, make you feel more complete, and it will be very natural that you will always be by their side. Never ever forget it.